Welcome to the Intimate Feminine, opening channels to deeper intimacy in sex, relationship, and love. Allow yourself to sink in as everything inside you becomes beautifully and sensually unfurled.
Hi, it's Jacqueline. There is such deep longing inside humans to share love through deep, intimate connection. Meeting, knowing, and loving Arlia Hoffman has and continues to enrich, nourish, and catalyze my interior world. From the very moment I looked in her eyes, I knew this woman. Together, we have created, facilitated, and deepened into varied feminine temple practices and communion. But it's truly the nuances of our shared mystical lineage that keeps us intimately connected. In this episode, Arlia and I explore both the beautiful potency and the shadowy delusions of ecstatic feminine energy in her deep longing for love, sensuality, and intimacy.
So welcome everyone to the next series of episodes on the Intimate Feminine, in which I am going to dive in deep with Arlia Hoffman, who, if you have listened to my opening first few episodes, Arlia is sort of the first catalyst to a major shift in how my experience began to unfold in terms of deep diving into a spiritual community that is in person rather than just virtual. So Arlia is joining me today. Arlia is the creator of the Women's Sanctuary, which I'm sure we'll speak about during our conversation. And also, I really just wanted to take this time, and Arlia and I have shared so many conversations over the 6 years now that we have been connected. And I wanted to deep dive into a glimpse of what that looks like when we share conversation. That's my kitties making noise over there. Of course, they wait until I'm live. Just a glimpse of that to give all of you some more perspective, not only on my story or my story with George, but also on all of the many aspects of being a feminine, navigating relationship and intimacy and polarity, and also what it truly is to love. And for Arlia and I specifically, how all of that impacted each of us individually and then us together as women who are very deeply connected and sort of threading out into our lives in many, many different ways. So Arlia, I am delighted to finally be doing this with you. We've done many conversations on your podcast, and now here we are sort of christening the Intimate Feminine and my space. So I am honored and thank you.
Oh, it is my pleasure. I am honored to be here, and I'm so thrilled for the Intimate Feminine. It's just going to be just a very rich, luscious journey, because that's who you are. That's how you live. And so I'm thrilled to share this journey with you and really give our listeners, your listeners, a glimpse of what our journey's been like.
And to give voice to it, which I love.
Yes.
You know, I've been writing about these things for a number of years, and I've actually found that when I write about something within a year or two, or sometimes more, but now it seems those windows are getting smaller, it shows up in my world. So going all the way back to the beginning, speaking of writing things down, you know where I'm going to go with this, which is I shared a little bit with listeners in my opening episodes about how we met, and that I had looked up where are women's groups happening? I found the Awakening Women Institute, understood there is such a thing called Women's Temple, which you are certified, trained in, and we're facilitating. And I would love you to speak a little bit about that. And learned that it was happening the next night. I had never met you. I knew nothing about you. We exchanged quick messages. I showed up to Women's Temple. I've shared how it was for me. If you have anything you want to say about how it was for you, I would love you to do that. And then I want to jump to the farm and the writing.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I love the story because I was, I don't know if you recall this, but it was also, that time period was right before a particular conference that they were holding, Awakening Women.
Yes.
And I was already in conversation with their staff about my potentially going. And usually if somebody's coming to Temple, they find me through the web, they find me through social media, they find me. You found Awakening Women Institute and then found our temple. So I get a message from their staff saying,
that's right.
By the way, this person reached out to me and I missed the first message that I got. And so the first thing I saw was somebody named Jackie Robinson may be attending Temple tonight. Or have you talked to Jackie Robinson? I was like, okay, is this a joke? Jackie Robinson? What are you talking about? I was so clueless. And so it took me a few minutes because this was actually the night of Temple. So I'm unloading, I'm setting up. And I'm like, I don't understand what's happening. And when I took a moment to read it, I was like, okay, there's someone coming. This is her name. That's awesome. Great. And so I was already prepped for somebody kind of like flummoxing my energy.
because they also messaged you at the time. I wanted to also attend that next conference, and I hadn't been to the first one.
That's right.
So there was a back and forth between myself.
They were asking me to meet you and to give them some feedback. So yeah, so that was all of that. And so we were so Women's Temple, based on the model that Shamali Arda developed at Awakening Women Institute, is a sacred circle based really in ancient traditions of women gathering, with really a modern flavor. It really helps women. It brings women together in embodied spiritual practice, and it's really challenging to describe because it is in the moment and embodied. But it tends to involve music and meditation and connection with other women. And the crux of it is that a woman really comes home to her body in a way that connects her deeper with herself and with the universe and whatever spiritual connection she has. It we don't define what that is. It's however she defines it for herself. And as I started doing this work, it was so rewarding. I heard women saying, I never knew how much I needed this, that this was missing in my life because the culture just doesn't have it. Even in the Western yogic traditions, it's that deep feminine presence and connection is missing. So that's where we were on that evening. I was leading this group in a woman's home. And so, Jackie walks in and she's, I don't remember. You might have missed the opening. I think you missed the opening.
No.
Were you there early? Okay.
I remember walking up the steps and seeing the sign on the door that said, if you're here for Temple, come on in. And my eyes got teary before I ever came in. And then I came in and sat down and I had no idea.
Oh, we hadn't started yet. Okay.
I didn't know which woman was you. I knew Arlia was there, but I was just sort of taking it all in very quietly.
It's always an interesting experience when a woman experiences that for the first time, because it's just so, well, I'll use the word awakening. It's just like opening. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so, so one of our first practices was meeting the other woman, I believe, with eye to eye, with an eye gaze, and then maybe, just woman to woman with eye gazing, and our eyes locked. And I think we immediately embraced. And I was like, oh, this feels familiar. This woman feels really important. Like there was just an instant connection. And that was really exciting because it was, I didn't really have those intimate connections in my life, and just that instant sense of recognition, and sisterhood was exciting. So, I don't even remember the rest of that temple evening. Just that I think you dropped into practice really easily. It was definitely something you were already aligned with, and from that moment on, we started talking and finding our words, our alignment,
synergy.
our synergy. Yeah. And,
or it found us.
Yeah, it was pretty unstoppable at that point.
Yes. I recall the feeling of connecting with you, and the two pieces that I remember immediately after that were, we decided we were going to meet for coffee. And by then I knew I didn't need to go to the conference. And I remember saying to you, I already know all of this. I just don't know that I know it. We met for coffee. We sort of drank in the energy and each other. And we sat at that very first date and we said, let's go on a writing retreat together. We didn't even know each other. And probably about a month later, we journeyed a few hours to the southeast end of Georgia and spent time on this gorgeous old family cotton farm. And that's where the writing comes in. Like we had such instant drop in connection. We went to the farm. Our expectation was we were each writing. I was writing, you were writing, we were going to go there. We were just going to be dropped into a similar energy of the women's temple that was very just contemplative and connected and nourishing, incredibly nourishing. And that's not at all what happened on that retreat. I feel like you came with some materials for your writing. I came with some materials. I had books, you had books. You had large, tear it off and stick it to the wall poster board paper. And how many pages did we fill, Arlia?
10? 8 to 10. Yeah. And, the thing that I recall is from, you talked about meeting for coffee. I actually do not remember that meeting for some reason, but I do remember us really discovering that we had an archetypal alignment between you with Venus and me with Aphrodite. And that was huge in our lives. It still is, but it was really big in our lives at that point. And that really gave me the sense of trust and openness to share my life story with you, which was still pretty tender and not something I would share with everyone. And if you want to hear it, you can go back to my podcast, The Women's Sanctuary, and listen to Holy Rebellion. There are 2 parts. But it was a story of my own awakening, of waking up in my late 30s, sexual, spiritual awakening, questioning everything, really my life kind of falling apart and having to start over. And so, I, at least at that point, I was able to just be, totally myself and say, this is my story. This is who I am. And it was incredible to be welcomed and understood by somebody like that. So when we went to the farm, it was like, okay, we can tell we're 2 women doing very similar work with similar sensibilities, and, what can we create together? I also brought my camera, and I guess we talked about, I'm a photographer, and I also know that that's also an awakening tool. So I think the potential existed for us to do a photo shoot. I just didn't. that was an extraordinary piece of that weekend. So yeah, we just, it's incredible when two people who are with that kind of synergy can just drop into a field and let the feminine take up space and flow, especially in an environment where you have all the time and space and nature supporting you. It was an incredible journey. And really what we ended up doing was not much writing. just a lot of talking and sharing thoughts and really finding how that archetype and how the deep feminine was manifesting through us, in us, and where the overlap was. It was a fascinating time of, wow, okay, here's a new sister. What does the feminine look like in her, and how it look like in me, and where's the overlap, and what could we be doing together? That was an extraordinary creative space.
And it didn't stop. The creative energy that came through. What's incredibly fascinating about that is we began channeling and birthing all of this page after page after page around. For you, it was known as Aphrodite. For me, it was Venus, but it was this sensual, eros drenched, highly sexually feminine, beauty essence charged energy. And your awakening through, as you tell in your story, and I'm not giving anything away, through the dissolution of your own marriage and the experience of love and connection outside of that, and how all of that unfurled for you had already happened. And I now know, like I knew then, but I now really know, being able to look back and map it, I was on the cusp of that. I was at that breaking point of, I've been in marriage this was 6 years ago. So for 24 years, I've been in marriage, and essentially the fullness of my sexuality has been made small, like the size of a pea. And I was losing life force. I was losing life force. I connected with you, and it was one of the very first places, in fact, probably the first place with a woman, that full depth of sexual, sensual, erotic expression was mirrored for me. And in some ways just completely opened and made available for me. And that was such a tipping point. It's fascinating that we wrote all of this out, and over 6 years, we have multiple times gone, okay, is it now? Are we aligned to create something now? Do you feel it? And we would be so close and know that it was almost there. And yet now we can sense how our movements prepared us for this moment, when it is now, when we are creating in some ways right out of the funnel of that energy that we opened. And as we'll talk about throughout the duration of this conversation, what we didn't know then was how many I see it as tunnels, like going through tunnels, how many portals I heard as well. And in each portal was this, ooh, oh my gosh. And then came the, holy shit, there's the shadow of it. There's the sticky. There's the pieces that have to be transmuted, which we had no idea about when we opened it.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me that both of those things happened. One, so much became available. And two, very clearly, we were not going to fully harness the potency, the depth, the purity, the true pure essence of that energy, really, until we went through all these cycles of what I believe is a feminine purification. It's a continued alchemy. And there are definitely, we're not going to outline them here, but there are definitely these thresholds you come to that you have to alchemize at this level before you can move deeper. And for the feminine, of course, it's descent. And so it's always looked to me like there are these layers, and you get through this one and you drop deeper, and there's a euphoria, and then there's a, okay, if you're going to stay without collapse at this depth and frequency, here's the places that need to be calibrated or cleared. Or go ahead.
I love that description, because when I would open layers, there was a euphoria. It's like, oh, there's so much available to me here. I can expand into this. Oh, I can own all these pieces of myself that I didn't see before. And then there is the shadow that also has to be integrated and learned.
Shit.
Yeah. The Buddhists call it the charnel ground. It's like that the pit of refuse that has to be, well, you said alchemized, but also just it's the compost out of which.
I saw that when you just said it. Like, I literally saw compost breaking down into that rich, beautiful, dark, fertile soil.
Yeah. And so in my process, which had been, okay, let me think about this. It had been 2017. So it had been a good,
it was 2016.
So it had been a good 12 years.
Wow.
Since mine, but definitely still in integration and in process. And you're never done, but, I had that foundation, and, you said you were on the cusp, and I could sort of feel that. I was like, let's wait and see what happens. But I think I was there to witness, and be a catalyst for that, breaking open.
100%. And one piece of that being, you were living and practicing polyamory at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was, for the first time in my life, not just quietly a little thought in the background.
Mm-hmm.
I was actively considering, am I polyamorous? Will there be a lover in my life? George and I, at that point, had gone as far as we could in our ability to meet at an intimate level. We mastered family. We mastered creating a home. We mastered those outer workings of what marriage is. But I love it
as you say that. I'm going to interrupt you, because that's exactly how I felt at the time of my divorce. I had everything. It was perfect. Yep.
But to a woman who is coded with the Aphrodite codes, with the Venus codes, with these erotically charged energetics, which I now understand are very much about life force. Back then, I thought it was much more about sex, and I get it now. They're partnered.
Yeah.
The sexuality is a piece of it. And that's a whole other story I don't want to get into yet. It'll come out later in different conversations.
Well, I will say this, it is also partnered with one's own spiritual path, because for me, the two went hand in hand. I was awakening sexually, but also really a big piece of it was breaking down and dismantling the belief systems I'd been given in my childhood, and starting over and going, okay, I have to figure out what actually I believe. And
yes.
And what's interesting, at 37, nobody ever told me that was actually what as part of adulting. Like, you have to figure that out, because I had been so inundated. I was going to say brainwashed. Maybe I was brainwashed in a particular belief system that there was no room to question it. And I believe the
We
same
both
thing.
were.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
both
Actually,
were. We both came
were.
out of very strong religion, being the good wife, doing the right thing, being the good mother, a certain kind of woman.
And I hadn't really put these two together before, but it really extended to that sort type of structure and control of your life force. So it, touched every aspect of your life, your parenthood, your relationship, your sexuality, your spiritual belief system, everything. And so to see you on the cusp, I was like, okay, so I've been here, and hopefully I can be of some support and some help. And
And you were, and we'll talk about that piece. But
yeah.
yes.
And so I think the other piece I'll just mention from the farm was that photo shoot. I just saw you were definitely able to embody your physicality and your beauty. And then I started to see the layers fall away, and you just got more and more exposed
Mm.
in every dimension, like to the point that you were just walking through the cotton fields naked, like that.
Oh.
That much in communion with yourself and nature. And to me, that's a huge piece of awakening. I mean, not that every woman has to do a nude photo shoot. It's about really feeling herself and feeling seen and inhabiting all of who she is and accepting all of who she is, and feeling that like all of that works together. It just so happened that, for us and for you, that particular photo shoot was a portal into that accessing that for yourself.
100%. And as you were just speaking, there was something that you said, exposed. I wrote that down, exposed. It's part of my more recent, I would say the last year, 6 months, 3 months, turned on high experience in deepening into my feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Something has flipped for George and I potently in the last several months as we get closer to this telling of our story. And being exposed over the last year to him, to his masculine, to the true full power of George and who he is, and not challenging him, not placing myself over him, not falling back into what I know from my experience is in my feminine lineage, is in the feminine collective, which is to protect rather than expose. And in this case, expose the true desire I have to be in partnership with the masculine, to be devoted to him, to give my love to him, and to just revel in that, has required exposure, to be vulnerably naked and open and exposed. So you just connected that all the way back to that experience at the farm, which for me, I was not accustomed to being nude anywhere. I really had probably never been nude outside. Your camera lens served, as you said, to be seen, and your camera lens served as I dare say, almost like a masculine seeing that deepened me into my feminine and the exposure, and ultimately was euphoric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You were going to say something.
I was remembering that when you access those levels of, we've used a couple of metaphors. One is the portal, and then being exposed. You're exposing yourself in this new energy, and you are exposed to new pieces of yourself. Like that level of visibility and opening. It's interesting that it required of us in those initial phases to really then be very secretive, because there was no societal container for who we were.
So what do you mean? Like, can you say more about, I'm not sure what you're referencing.
Well, and in my own sexual awakening, then living through that, I couldn't be free and open about who I was being because there was no societal place for that to be okay. And I think that's just part of the process is protecting it in the way of protecting a developing fetus or protecting a baby bird until it is full enough to really be stand on its own. Does that make sense? I could feel this energy of, yes, there's the exposure, but then there's also this piece of, yeah, this doesn't fit in the world. What do I do with it now? And that's
absolutely. 100% that makes sense. And what I would say now is that was my experience throughout all of this until a certain point, really until January 1, 2020. My experience was, it has to stay here. I can't be who I am. And what I now know is I wasn't hiding it from the world. I was hiding it from myself, even though it felt the whole way along that I was living it out loud. The fear of the consequence for it to be lived out loud beyond my intimate space was overwhelming.
That's a piece I was thinking earlier I hadn't brought forward is the courage it takes to step into that exposure, to step into a new way of being. It's not a small thing.
No.
You're blowing up all your old belief systems, and to be able to step into an entirely new way of being is extremely challenging and takes a lot of courage.
All the way along.
Yeah. And so in this space of you opening, we came back to Atlanta, and I just remember everything changed. Like the whole format of the Atlanta Women's Temple changed. We were suddenly, working in that container together. I was thrilled. I was thrilled to have a temple sister to help hold the energy and of that work. What do you remember?
I remember coming back and holding temple. I had forgotten that, frankly, until this conversation. And I then remember we were holding temple in Atlanta, and then we began holding temple an hour away. And the thirst in those women for more, to me, was more than anything during those years in response to the energy we held and channeled and offered. The way those women responded and the desire to drink it in was very telling. Yeah. I do remember that. And I just remember one fascinating, and I keep saying fascinating because I am totally fucking fascinated. One also fascinating piece is you have, and I always forget, I think it's on your left side, right? Left.
Yes.
You have an A tattooed, a scarlet letter A tattooed.
Yes.
And that to me was enthralling, like right from the beginning. Like, here's this woman who is doing it out loud, and look, she's got it imprinted on her body. And it just felt so liberating to me. And I later would learn that I'm descended from, we've talked about this, from the actual woman on whom Hester Prynne of the Scarlet Letter was based. My descendants and Nathaniel Hawthorne were all living in the same area. It's gold. And it's these beautiful, I've used the language scarlet threads. There are these beautiful threads of scarlet that are woven between our energies around this feminine connection. And I believe they are woven around the globe and touch many women, hundreds of thousands of women who carry these codes. what ultimately we've talked about how we opened it all. And you asked me what changed. Everything.
Mm.
Everything. My whole world from the moment I sat on that red sofa on Super Bowl night, February 3rd, 2016, from that moment on, my entire world, the center of my universe, changed. And I dropped into spirituality was first, the expression of my feminine for the first time. I was more intimately connected with, which I hadn't been in this way since opening to mysticism 11 years earlier. Everything reordered itself. And suddenly I went from a housewife, mother of 3 children who were going off to college, to this woman who was beginning to form and create spiritual community, channeling feminine energy, and everything opened and changed. What we know now, and we've touched on it a little bit, is opening all of that. We didn't see then, you and I have discussed this piece of the spiritual glamour. We didn't see or understand then how going down this sort of portal, black hole, rabbit hole was going to upend everything. And I believed I was already at the point that it had upended everything, but I had no idea.
But just wait. Just wait. Yeah,
have some popcorn.
I'm reflecting on that community in Athens. It was ecstatic, because suddenly we formed and also dropped into, both happened at the same time, this community of spiritual seekers, the women were thirsty for it, and we were building that community, and there were others connected in the community, and it felt really good. And we were doing
really good.
Felt really good. We were doing a lot of spiritual practice. Everybody felt, some kinship and alignment, and it was building. And there was a lot of what we would call spiritual glamour in that. There was the seduction of the connection, yes, and of course the transcendence experienced when you practice together in groups. I don't know if I would call it necessarily a belief system, but we all had similar perspectives. And, there were several key personalities in that group. You and I were 2 of them. And so it was all kind of, some of it was hinged on personality and the euphoria of all of that connection, which seemed perfectly normal and right.
And so yummy, right?
Yummy.
It was so yummy. Yeah. I actually had forgotten about the word and the frequency and the energy back then of ecstatic.
Yeah. And we were all chasing that.
Oh, as you spoke it, I felt the energy of a drug, of an addiction. Yeah. For me, I had no idea until moving into the Athens community and all of what unfolded there that I was ecstatic. Mm-hmm. I knew I had connected to that energy 11 years earlier, Saint Teresa of Avila, mysticism, something very deep and potent and pure had opened in me around the ecstatic energy, witnessing and learning about Teresa of Avila and the depth of her passionate love affair with the divine.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that scared the hell out of me when I started having these intimate experiences with what I felt as God.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to 2016 and dropping into this community, and you and I didn't drop into that. We had a few months that was just us and temple and communing.
Right.
Dropping into that community, I didn't know who I was as an ecstatic before that. And once I connected to that, as with very much of what transpired there in myself, was this is it.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. This is everything I've written about in my blog, everything that is in my journals, everything I opened during mysticism, everything I have yearned for to feel run through my body. The feminine wants to embody and feel it in her body. And I felt
all of it.
Everything. And as we said, it was euphoric in the early years of that, which I would say it stayed euphoric. Certainly 2016, 2017, I feel like I stayed in it. Your life called you elsewhere with what was happening in your world.
Mm-hmm.
And by 2017, for sure, I was hooked.
Yeah.
It was like a drug line going right into my system. And it was 2017. We returned to the farm. You and I were there. I had had an experience with this man, and my body shut down. I texted you, Arlia, I am not okay. You came to me, you put me in the shower. Like my body went through withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah.
Much like coming off a drug. And I didn't understand it then.
Mm-hmm.
If I was the woman I am today, I would have yanked her the hell out of there. But I didn't understand it. It became more of the, this is so painful, but it's because there's so much love. It's because it's the love, and it had the twin flame
love.
And it's divine love, and it's right. And I channel and I leave my body and I bring energies into my body, and all of it was real. And all of it also had so many shadowy hooks and triggers and underlying, and I'm talking about in my own self, because I can speak all day about other people who were involved, but the truth is the only reality I actually know for sure is what I went through. And so all of these layers of my experience, my upbringing, my conditioning placed me in a position to not even think about walking away.
Yeah.
The euphoria when it dropped in was too high, too seductive, too pleasurable, too supposedly connected.
And I completely understand that information, that perspective, because I was in the same place when I went through my awakening, 2003, 2004. You know, it was so addicting, that pleasure, the full embodiment, the deeper levels I was experiencing. Nobody could have told me, nobody could have reasoned with me, and people tried. And so I was
same.
Yeah. And so when I was watching your process, I was, involved to a degree, and then I was a bit on the edges, and I was also watching, really a lot of the pain you were experiencing. And and hindsight's 2020. I didn't have as clear vision then as about exactly what was going on, because I was wrapped up in it to a degree myself, but I could see the pain you were in, and the pain that type of dissonance was creating in you. And I think the most I could do was say, are you sure do you feel in alignment? Do you feel in integrity with yourself? Does it feel, you feel whole? And that was all I could say. There was no one who was going to be able to say, this is not right for you, because it's like, I mean, it's a strong analogy, but it is with any addict. You can't tell them, that's not really good for you. Why don't you stop? That's not going to work. They have to experience the full depths of the entire experience to really wake up at some point.
Yes.
Maybe
And
that's just part of it.
Well, I believe it is. It's similar to that parent-child relationship where the parent has the wisdom of having been through the experience and could easily tell the child, here, let me give you this.
Yeah.
And actually my brother is now experiencing that. He's come to an age, he's old enough as a parent that he's experiencing that with one of my children. He can see, and he's like, I know, but I know I also can't push it.
No,
I'm like,
don't do it that
can't.
way. There's a much better way. This is much easier. Do it this way.
Yes. I already found the path. And the beautiful thing about you saying that, and even more so, the beautiful thing about how we are sitting here as women in ourselves, number one, but two, women who deeply love and walk beside each other today. That's miraculous, because I knew in those places where I didn't know then it was an addiction. I really believed it was love. Yeah. And I needed to just keep working on myself. Right. I needed to heal my insecurities. I need to figure out my jealousy, all things that truly
that are real.
And yet there's this twist underneath of them that I eventually, when I walked away, came to understand. This actually isn't about me continuing to look at insecurities. I am in a space. I am in a position. I am in a relationship. I am in an energetic dynamic that has a hook. And as long as I stay in a connection that is not aligned for me, I will be triggered endlessly. Mm-hmm. And not triggered because I haven't healed my shit. Triggered because, hey, Jacqueline, you're delusional. This isn't it. And if there was something here you needed, you got it. It's time to go.
Yeah. Delusional. And that's a great word. Yeah.
It's if you look at Carolyn Mace's archetypes and you look at that mystic card, in the shadow is delusional rapport with the divine. Ooh. Of the mystic.
Bingo.
That is precisely what I had. And we did join a community of mystics. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it may be different now, but at the time, there was a lot of unfiltered shadow still present in that mystical energy. Going back to the miracle of us sitting here, while I was engaged in all of that and going through excruciating pain at times, you had been my person. You and I haven't even talked about this. There was a space of time where, because you were in that, let's call the parent role, right? And I'm in the child role who's having the experience. There was a period of time where I would come to you woman to woman, Arlia, I'm like, I can't even imagine receiving one of my phone calls from that time. I was devastated. I was broken, like just a puddle on the floor, and not just sad. Like it felt like my insides were being pulled out. And I remember feeling, Arlia doesn't get it. Arlia doesn't get it. Arlia can't be there for me. Arlia can't stay with me through the pain. Arlia doesn't want to be a part of this. And so now having the perspective of absolutely true, and it was true then, I did have the awareness then that when you would go, well, you know, that's how he is. Is that what you want? I would just be irritated. Like, you don't get it. You don't get the kind of pain I'm in. You don't understand that he needs to be different and I'm suffering. You don't get it. You don't get it. And so for a space of time, there was never, ever any animosity between us. But we sort of, as relationships naturally do, we flowed out a bit. And then eventually it wasn't until it was over that we began to flow back in. And the beauty of that from this perspective is that in some way you held a steady, grounded space of, okay, I love you.
I appreciate you saying that, because that was my intent, was to hold, to not leave, but to hold space as best as I could, but also to leave you to your experience. You had to have your experience, and to know that I couldn't talk you out of it.
You couldn't. You that's the absolute truth for any of our listeners. If you're the woman going through this, and there's another being in your world who you're experiencing the way that I'm speaking about with you and I, they have wisdom for you. And if you're able, ask them. And to the women who are in your position in that experience, there was nothing you could have done. You couldn't save me. You couldn't go, well, Jackie, when I was going through it, blah, blah, blah. And you probably did in the beginning. I wasn't going to hear it because I was deep in it was a portal. It absolutely was a portal of delusion. And I can say all kinds of reasons why that is: my own conditioning, seductive energies outside of myself, seductive energies within myself. It doesn't matter. I was in the delusion of what love is.
Yeah, and for someone in my position, that the task is just to be present, to hold the space, to mirror love, to mirror truth, and just to be there, and to allow
and
each other to have their experience.
You did. And the beauty is, we never had to talk about that. We never had to work it out between us. We never had to repair the gap. It was never like that. It was simply you staying where you had been while I flitted and danced about a little bit.
On your journey.
And I was, I don't have criticism of myself as woman during those times, because I was as conscious as I could be intentionally.
Absolutely.
And yet I was still in a bubble of delusion, I know now, which there's the spiritual glamour. We spoke about spiritual glamour on your podcast at length. So for anybody who wants to dive into that, we're not going to do it anymore here. But what episode is it on? It's the Women's Sanctuary.
Yeah, it's just called The Allure of Spiritual Glamour. It's on the Women's Sanctuary podcast. So we can put a link to that. But yeah, we really dive into the energies of that experience for us in that community.
Great.
And in the
Yeah.
last, that's just evolved over the last several years. In 2020, 2021, us really beginning to identify what that is and leave it
Yes.
behind.
Yes. And I don't know what you would say for you, but for me, the movement in myself that's connected to my relationship with George, because that's the nature of what we're talking about, right? Relationship and love and intimacy is what moved me to being able to really see and sense what was true during that time. I wasn't going to understand the full, like, for a few years, as you well know, coming out of this experience, I asked all the questions. Okay, well, what the hell was that? And why, where's the experience I had of the euphoria? What brings that now?
I tell you what, that's a big piece to talk about. Maybe in the next piece of this is like what does that process look like to integrate a very, I was about to say traumatic, but just really traumatic experience, to make meaning of it, or do you? And how do you? It's taken me years to really process, and I still look back, on my own experience and go, oh yeah, okay, I get that piece. I always thought, how long will it take before I can begin writing and pulling the gold from that experience? And I remember before I met you, 2011-ish, 2008, I sat down and I started writing, and I couldn't do it. I tried really hard for about a year, and I just couldn't. I didn't have enough perspective then because I'm also kind of still in it, but didn't have enough perspective to really pull all the gold from that experience. And so, yeah, I definitely will be we will both be pulling the scarlet threads, as you say, from that experience the rest of our lives.
Yeah. I love where it has brought us now. And I agree. There's more conversation to be had. So let's sort of bring this full circle, this particular conversation. I want to ask you one final question in doing so. That it's like one that if I was listening, I would want to know. What was it like to be the woman who walked beside me through all of this?
Do I have to answer that? I'm kidding.
You can think about it.
No. Well, first of all, it was another synchronicity. It's like, wow, here I am being able to hold space for someone else who's going on a similar journey I had. And it was an honor and a huge responsibility.
Wow.
Because I certainly didn't know what you were in for, but I knew it was big. We didn't know exactly where it was going, but that if my journey was any indication, it was arduous and tumultuous. And at some point, it would transform itself into it. You would spin yourself out of it. It come home to yourself, come back to yourself in a way that went, oh, okay, that was important, but now that's done. And, or that piece of it's done. I knew that was probably roughly your journey. And at the times you were in the most pain and most torture, I just had to remember what it was like for me and how deluded I was in my path, and that it was absolutely, It was my path. That's what was necessary. That's what my soul chose as the vehicle for my awakening.
Yeah.
And so it was rough at times, but I always had that perspective of, yeah, and this is her awakening. And so what's my work here? My work is to be the witness, to hold space, to mirror love, and give counsel when asked. And I'll say on a personal note, that's one of my gifts is like, there's a lot of wisdom that is held, and you have to really want it if you're going to ask for it. I mean, and that's not personal to me. That's one of my gifts that come through me. I don't really own that. It's just part of who I am. But so in order to walk beside you, it was like, okay, it's here if she needs it or if she asks for it. Otherwise, it's her journey. And I also feel very honored too that we are still sitting here together, that our relationship endured through that. Because there have been phases in the meantime since then that have, we ebb in and out of each other's orbs, but that deep sisterhood remains. And for that, I'm deeply grateful.
Yes.
And here we are from this perspective, able to really catalyze all the wisdom that we have and have experienced because we've been through it and are able to, I think, reflect on it with wisdom and compassion and love, and also the understanding that without judgment, of knowing this was the path we chose, and here we are. We have not just survived, we have thrived, and counted all gold.
Absolutely. We have pulled through the energetics of the portal we opened at the farm for our writing retreat in 2016. We have pulled them through, gone deep into the underworld on a number of levels, and pulled through multiple facets of crystallized purity and truth and true eros of the feminine, which looks very different. If we were filling those pages in this moment, it would look very different.
Very different.
Much more grounded.
Much more depth and wisdom to it. And, as you were saying, going through the depths of it, it's like, we had to be stripped like a nana of all those layers that were not our true selves. We've been able to really rise from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll close on this note, you bringing in Anana. It was during those years I deeply became aware of Anana right at the beginning. And throughout that experience, and only during that window of time, I experienced and became aware of a different tone of goddess energy in every energy center of my body. And that to me was representative of the 7 gates of Inanna going through the underworld. And at the same time I was in delusion, I intuitively knew I was in it. The delusion that stayed after I walked away was thinking, whew, I'm out. When really I was hanging raw and naked and being eaten alive down to the bones of the purity of my being on the meat hook, really until a few months ago.
Mm. Wow.
And we'll talk more about that.
I can't wait to hear about that.
Arlia Hoffman, I love you. I adore you. Thank you. More to come.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for sharing this time today. You can find and follow us on all major podcast platforms. We invite you to like, share, and be in touch. Find out more about Jacqueline and her work at JacquelineLRobinson.com. This is The Intimate Feminine, opening channels to deeper intimacy in sex, relationship, and love. This show is produced by Arlia Hoffman.